Thugs kicked a retired military dog. What happened when his seal owner found out was brutal. The mist hung thick over the Colorado highlands, curling through the Douglas firs like smoke from an unseen fire. The cabin sat at the edge of Sierra Ridge Lake, 20 miles from the nearest paved road, a half-forgotten scar of timber country swallowed by wilderness. To anyone else it was the middle of nowhere. To Ethan Cole, it was the last place left to disappear. He had once been the kind of man who lived by a team, a creed, a mission, a Navy SEAL, the kind who ran toward gunfire when everyone else was running away. But that was before Yemen, before the ambush, before command called it an intelligence error and shipped him home with medals he never asked for and ghosts that never left. Now he built his days from silence, fixing the roof, chopping wood, fishing the lake. Routine was the only therapy he trusted. And always there was Ranger. The German shepherd lay stretched by the porch, his sable coat gleaming in the fading light, one ear cocked, eyes always scanning. He was more than a dog. He was the last surviving member of Ethan's unit. They had bled together, burned together, and watched their brothers die together. Ranger carried his own scars. A thin white line ran down his flank where shrapnel had torn through him 2 years earlier. He limped sometimes, but his spirit never did. When the wind changed, Ranger lifted his head. His nose twitched, then a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Ethan glanced up from the axe he was sharpening. "What is it, boy?" Ranger didn't bark. He never wasted sound. Instead, he rose, muscles taut, gaze fixed on the tree line beyond the lake. The forest was darkening fast. The sun had slipped behind the peaks, leaving a bruised sky and a heavy quiet. Ethan's instincts prickled, the same sixth sense that had once kept him alive. He stood, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved but the mist. Still, something felt off. He'd learned long ago that unease was just the body remembering what the mind refused to see. He walked to the porch railing, eyes narrowing. "Easy," he murmured. Ranger's growl faded to a watchful hum. For a long moment, there was only the whisper of wind through pine. Then, faintly, the crunch of gravel. Ethan's hand went automatically to his hip, where a sidearm used to rest. He hated that reflex but couldn't kill it. A set of headlights appeared at the far end of the access road. Slow, deliberate, too quiet to be casual. The truck crawled up the incline, its tires spitting rocks. Ethan waited, saying nothing. The vehicle stopped a few yards from the cabin. An old Chevy, paint worn to the primer, engine idling unevenly. The door opened, and an old man climbed out. "Evening," the stranger called, raising a weathered hand. "Didn't mean to spook you. Name's Joe Patterson. I've got the place 2 ridges over." Ethan didn't answer. Ranger stood beside him, silent but alert, tail rigid. Joe smiled faintly. "Used to be law enforcement around here. Don't worry, I'm not here on business." He walked forward slowly and placed a wooden crate on the porch step. Inside were 2 fresh trout lying on ice. "Welcome gift. Thought you might like a good meal that didn't come out of a can." Ethan's tension eased a fraction. "Appreciate it," he said finally. His voice was low, rough from disuse. Joe nodded. "Quiet spot you got. Too quiet for most folks." He glanced toward the lake, his expression dimming. "You picked a strange time to move up here. Lot of change coming. Developers sniffing around, buying up land like it's poker chips. Be careful who you trust." Ethan studied the old man's face. There was sincerity there, something familiar in his tone. "Thanks for the warning." Joe tipped his cap, climbed back into the Chevy, and drove off into the dusk. The sound of the engine faded until only the wind remained. Inside, Ethan cleaned the fish and fed Ranger a few small strips of raw trout. The dog ate methodically, eyes never leaving the window. The night pressed close to the cabin, heavy and alive. Then Ranger froze, his head jerked toward the north wall, ears pricked. The change was instant, muscles locked, breath short, eyes fixed. Ethan felt it too, a vibration more than a sound, low and distant. A vehicle, maybe an ATV. Then laughter, young, sharp, echoing across the water. He stepped to the window. Down by the lake, 3 dots of light bobbed through the fog. Flashlights, the sound of engines revved, tires tearing through wet earth. Teenagers, locals. Probably drunk. But there was something mean in their laughter. "Stay," Ethan ordered. Ranger obeyed, but didn't relax. Outside, the lights grew brighter, closer, until they illuminated the fence line he had rebuilt last week. The first ATV cut the engine, and a boy's voice rang out. "Old man's cabin, huh? Thought this place was empty." "Keep it down." Another hissed. "My old man said some psycho vet lives up here." "Then let's wake him up." Ethan's jaw tightened. He reached for the shotgun by the door, not to use it, just to hold it, to remember who he was now. But before he could move, Ranger lunged toward the door, barking once, short, sharp, commanding. Outside, the boys laughed. "You hear that? He's got a dog," one shouted. "Guess we're not the only animals out here tonight." Then came the sound, a dull thud, metal hitting wood. They were throwing rocks at the fence. Ethan opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "Enough!" His voice cut through the fog like a rifle crack. The boys froze. Their flashlights found him, tall, broad, in a flannel shirt and jeans, face half lit by the porch light, eyes cold as steel. "Get off my property," he said. "Now." For a second, no one moved. Then the one in front, barely 18, blonde, arrogant, revved his ATV. "Didn't know this dirt was yours, old man." Ranger stepped forward, hackles raised, a low growl building in his throat. The boy sneered, kicked a spray of mud towards the dog. "Nice mutt. What's he gonna do, bite me?" Ethan took a step down the stairs, voice like gravel. "He won't have to." The kid hesitated. His friends shifted, uneasy. Something in Ethan's stance, the stillness, the precision, told them this wasn't a man you taunted. "Come on," one muttered. "Let's go." But the blonde kid wasn't finished. "Fine," he said, spitting into the dirt. "We're going. Enjoy your war stories." He revved the engine, spattering mud across the porch, and the ATVs roared away into the darkness. Ethan watched the red tail lights fade. Ranger stayed rigid, ears tracking until the last sound vanished. Only when silence returned did Ethan kneel beside him, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "They're gone." Ranger's muscles quivered under his palm, the aftershock of adrenaline. He looked up at Ethan, eyes glinting in the faint light. The dog's gaze said what words couldn't. "This isn't over." Ethan nodded, staring into the black wall of forest. He knew the feeling. He'd lived it. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved. The night was utterly still. Too still. Then somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, followed by faint, angry shouting. A woman's voice. A man's. The echoes drifted across the lake and were swallowed by the trees. Ethan turned back towards the cabin, unease gnawing at the edges of his calm. Ranger lingered by the porch, staring into the woods, every nerve alive. The piece of Sierra Ridge had cracked, just a hairline fracture. But enough. Something had been set in motion. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole knew that the ghosts he'd tried to bury had found him again. Morning broke over Sierra Ridge in pale silver light. Mist clung to the lake like smoke, drifting slow and restless. Ethan Cole moved through his morning routine with the precision of habit, splitting wood, checking the fence line, scanning the tree line before every swing of the axe, To anyone watching, he looked calm. But calm for him was just another kind of readiness. Ranger padded beside him, steady and silent. The German shepherd's gait was purposeful, his head turning with every shift in the wind. He paused now and then, nostrils flaring, sensing something Ethan couldn't see. Out here, instincts mattered. Theirs had kept them alive more than once. By midday, Ethan was at the lake, repairing an old rowboat. The water lay flat and glassy, reflecting the snow-capped ridge. He worked in silence until the low hum of an engine rose from the distance, an old truck grinding its way up the gravel path. Ranger's ears shot up. The dog's low growl came before the sound reached Ethan's ears. "Easy," Ethan said quietly. Ranger obeyed, but his muscles stayed tense. The truck rounded the bend and came into view, the same dented Chevy he'd seen before. Joe Patterson stepped out, wearing the same faded flannel, a thermos in one hand and a wooden crate in the other. "Morning, son," Joe called out. "Didn't mean to drop in unannounced. Figured I'd bring by a peace offering." He set the crate down, revealing 3 fat salmon wrapped in crushed ice. "Caught 'em down by Mason Creek. Best ones I've seen all season." Ethan nodded once, taking in the gesture. "You didn't have to." "Sure I did," Joe replied, glancing at Ranger, who stood beside Ethan like a soldier guarding his post. "He doesn't look like the type who shares." Ranger tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on the old man. Joe chuckled softly. "You're a fine animal, ain't you? Seen that kind of posture before, in K9s and soldiers. Can't tell which one's more dangerous." Ethan's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Depends who you ask." Joe leaned on the railing. "I used to wear a badge, sheriff of this county back before my knees gave out. Knew every ridge and creek from here to the pass. Back then, this was a quiet place. You could go a whole season and not hear an engine after dark." He paused, eyes drifting towards the horizon. "Not anymore." Ethan followed his gaze. Across the lake, faint plumes of dust rose from the far slope. Construction vehicles, their outlines barely visible through the haze. "What's going on over there?" Ethan asked. "Developers," Joe said, his tone tight. "A company called Grant Industries bought up half the land around the lake. Say they're building a resort, lodges, airstrip, the works. Promise jobs and tourists, but it's not sitting right with me. Too many men in suits, too many black SUVs with plates that don't belong here." Ethan frowned. "You think they're dirty. I think they're the kind of people who don't take no for an answer." Joe said. "And your land, son, it sits right between their new access road and the ridge. My guess? They've already knocked on your door, or they will soon." Ethan's jaw clenched. "They came last night. Kids on dirt bikes. Thought it was a game." Joe's eyes sharpened. "Kids? Or a test?" Ethan looked at him. "What do you mean?" Joe took off his cap and rubbed a weathered hand through his thinning hair. "When men like Grant want something, they don't start with contracts. They start with noise. See how far they can push before someone pushes back." Ranger let out a short bark, turning towards the woods. A faint echo of engines rippled through the still air, distant but distinct. Joe's head snapped up. "You hear that?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Been hearing it more lately." The rumble faded into silence. Ethan watched Ranger, who stood rigid, tail low, body pointed towards the sound like a compass needle to true north. The dog's entire being seemed focused, as if he could sense, intent in the vibration of the ground. Joe exhaled slowly. "You've got yourself a soldier there. Trust his gut, even if it sounds crazy. These mountains teach you how to listen. Some folks forget that." Ethan nodded but said nothing. He wasn't used to taking advice. Yet something about Joe's tone, part warning, part weariness, cut through his usual guard. Joe lifted his thermos. You ever need a hand, or just a cup of something that doesn't taste like ash? My place is 3 miles east. Follow the old logging trail till you hit the fence with the blue marker. Appreciate it, Ethan said. Joe started toward his truck, then paused. You know, when I first heard someone bought the old Mitchell property, I figured it was another city fool trying to play mountain man. But I was wrong. You're not hiding, are you, son? You're watching. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Does it matter? Only if what you're watching decides to watch back. Joe tipped his cap and drove away, the truck's engine fading into the trees. For a long time after, Ethan stood still. Ranger sat at his side, staring at the ridge where the sound had come from. The faint hum returned, just barely, a single engine cutting through the forest before vanishing again. That night, Ethan ate one of Joe's salmon, seared over a cast-iron pan. Ranger lay by the door, head on his paws, but his ears stayed upright the entire time. Outside, fog rolled off the lake, wrapping the cabin in thick white. Somewhere in the distance, a chain-link gate clanged. Then another sound, metal hitting stone, followed by a distant shout. Ethan froze, listening. Nothing more came. He went to the window, but the fog was too dense to see beyond the porch. He could feel Ranger behind him, silent but alive with tension. Probably just workers, Ethan muttered, though he didn't believe it. He locked the door anyway, something he hadn't done in months. As he settled into the chair by the fire, Ranger stayed alert, eyes fixed on the window. The dog's tail twitched once, then stilled. Ethan stared into the flames. Whatever it is, we're ready, he whispered. Ranger gave a low rumble in reply, not quite a growl, not quite agreement, just acknowledgement. Outside, deep in the fog, a figure stood at the edge of the woods. For a brief moment, a flashlight blinked once, twice, then vanished. Ethan didn't see it, but Ranger did. His eyes followed the spot long after it was gone, ears tilted forward, every muscle waiting for a threat that hadn't yet shown itself. The mountain had gone quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that waits before a storm. The morning sun cut through the fog as Ethan drove his old Ford into Hollow Creek, the nearest town to Sierra Ridge. It was little more than a handful of buildings, a diner, a hardware store, a gas station, and the sheriff's office that doubled as a post office. He hadn't been here in months. Solitude had become habit, but Ranger needed supplies, and the cabin was running low on fuel. As he pulled into the dusty main street, heads turned. In a town this small, strangers didn't stay strangers for long, and veterans with scars were never really strangers at all. People watched him the way they might watch a storm cloud, curious, cautious, hoping it would pass without damage. Ethan parked outside Miller's Supply, stepped out, and stretched. Ranger hopped down from the truck bed, tail low but alert. His collar glinted in the morning light, the engraved tag reading, Ranger U.S. Navy K-9. Inside, the store smelled of pine cleaner and old timber. A radio hummed softly, playing country music from the 80s. Ethan moved through the aisles, collecting canned food, rope, oil, a few packs of dog treats. The bell above the door jingled again. "Morning, Sheriff," the store clerk said. Ethan didn't turn immediately. The sound of boots and authority was unmistakable. When he did, he saw her, Sheriff Dana Brooks, tall, mid-30s, sharp eyes framed by a loose bun of chestnut hair. She carried herself like someone who had seen too much and learned not to show it. "Cole," she said, her tone neutral but observant. "Didn't expect to see you down here. Heard you'd gone off the grid." "Needed supplies," he replied simply. Her gaze flicked to Ranger. "That the famous partner?" Ethan gave a small nod. "He's the reason I'm still breathing." Before Dana could respond, the door opened again. and a burst of laughter filled the store. Lucas Grant stepped in, a man in his 40s, all charm and expensive cologne. His white dress shirt stood out against the rustic walls. 2 men in suits followed behind him. "Well, if it isn't the man of the hour," Lucas said smoothly. "Ethan Cole, right? The SEAL who bought the old Mitchell cabin." Ethan didn't reply. He set his items on the counter and waited. Lucas smiled, the kind that never reached his eyes. "I've been hoping to run into you. You've got a fine piece of land up there. Prime territory. My company's working on an eco-resort project around the lake. We'd love to include your property in the development." "Not interested." Lucas blinked, as if the word were foreign. "You haven't even heard the offer." "Didn't say I needed to." The room seemed to cool. Dana crossed her arms. "Mr. Grant, maybe you should—" Lucas cut her off with a grin. "No offense, Sheriff, but I think Mr. Cole's just being cautious. Perfectly understandable, given his past." His tone sharpened slightly. "But it'd be a shame if that land went to waste. You're sitting on the main access route to our build site. That kind of thing can complicate permits, security, all sorts of red tape." Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. "You're welcome to your red tape. My land's not for sale." Lucas's smile faltered. "Everyone's got a price." "Not everyone." For a brief moment, neither man moved. Then Ranger shifted forward, placing himself between Ethan and Lucas. The growl that came from his chest was low, but unmistakable, a warning honed from war zones, not backyards. Lucas stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Guess I hit a nerve." Dana stepped forward. "That's enough, Grant. You've made your pitch. Time to go." Lucas's grin returned, colder now. "Of course, Sheriff. I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome." He glanced at Ethan once more. "Think about it, Cole. The world's changing whether you like it or not." When they left, the air in the store felt heavier. Dana watched Ethan carefully. "You just made yourself a powerful enemy." Ethan shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first." She sighed. "For what it's worth, I've had my eye on Grant since he rolled into town. He's got half the county council in his pocket. If something starts happening up near your place, vandals, missing equipment, call me first. Don't take it on yourself." "I'll keep that in mind," he said, though they both knew he wouldn't. By dusk, Ethan and Ranger were on the dirt road home. The forest swallowed the light quickly, shadows stretching across the ridge. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, eyes on the tree line, head tilting with each noise. As the cabin came into view, Ethan slowed. Something was off. The gate he'd built last month hung slightly open, one hinge bent. He parked, cut the engine, and listened. The woods were too quiet. No crickets, no wind, just stillness. "Stay sharp," he whispered. Ranger jumped down first, sniffing the air. He padded toward the fence line, muscles tight, tail straight. A faint metallic rattle echoed from the back of the property. Then laughter, muffled but close. Ethan crept along the side of the cabin, shotgun in hand, every step silent on the damp earth. He rounded the corner and froze. 3 ATVs were parked just beyond the fence, engines idling. Their headlights threw wild beams across the grass. 4 young men stood near the edge, tossing beer cans, laughing too loudly. Ranger barked once, the sound sharp and commanding. "Hey!" one of them yelled. "There's the mutt!" Another kicked the fence post. "Let's see if the hero dog knows how to fetch." Ethan stepped into the light. "You've got 5 seconds to leave." They spun around. The leader, a tall blonde kid, smirked. "You the psycho vet everyone talks about?" 4 seconds. The boy laughed and spat on the ground. "You think you own this whole mountain?" 3. "Relax, old man. We're just having fun." 2. The boy raised his hands. "Fine, fine. Don't get your panties in a twist." He started toward his ATV but glanced back, eyes flicking to Ranger. Nice dog. Bet he used to kill people for fun. Ethan's voice dropped low. He's killed better men for less. The boy hesitated, unsure if it was a threat or a truth. Then he climbed onto his ATV, revved the engine, and tore off into the trees. The others followed, their laughter fading into the dark. Ethan stood there a moment longer, watching the lights vanish. Ranger stayed alert, his gaze fixed on the trail they'd taken, nose twitching. Then he growled softly. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Ranger didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the woods, fur bristling. Ethan followed his line of sight and caught it, a flicker of movement deeper in the trees. Not one of the kids, too still, too deliberate. A man, tall, wearing a dark jacket, standing motionless beside a pine, watching. By the time Ethan grabbed his flashlight and aimed it, the figure was gone. Ranger took off towards the woods, barking once, then stopping at the fence, whining low, uncertain. Ethan joined him, scanning the darkness. Nothing, just the whisper of the wind and the fading smell of diesel. He knelt beside Ranger, resting a hand on his neck. "You saw him too, didn't you?" Ranger gave a quiet huff, eyes still locked on the tree line. The dog's instincts were never wrong. Someone had been watching, and whoever it was hadn't come for beer or thrill rides. Ethan looked back toward the ridge, the night pressing close around him. For the first time, the mountains no longer felt like home. They felt like the beginning of a hunt, and he wasn't sure yet who the prey was. The next morning broke colder than usual, with a grey sky pressing low over Sierra Ridge. The forest smelled of damp pine and smoke from distant logging fires. Ethan was at the tree line, swinging his axe into a stubborn block of cedar, the rhythmic thud echoing across the quiet slope. The sound was grounding, simple, honest work that dulled the edges of memory. Ranger stayed nearby, stretched on a patch of dry earth, head up, watching the tree line. Every few minutes he scanned the horizon, nose twitching, ears flicking toward the faintest sound. He hadn't relaxed since the night before. Neither had Ethan. The faint roar of an engine broke the morning calm. 1, then 2, then 3. Ethan stopped mid-swing, listening. The sound climbed the ridge fast. Ranger stood, tail stiff, eyes locked on the trail below. Ethan muttered, "Not today." He leaned the axe against the stump, wiped his hands on his jeans, and started toward the cabin. But before he reached the porch, the ATVs burst from the trees. The same boys from last night, helmets off this time, faces flushed and wild. They reeked of beer and bravado. The leader, blonde, cocky, grinned when he saw Ethan. "Told you we'd be back, old man." Ethan said nothing. His calm was unnerving, a kind of stillness that made even Ranger pause. The dog stood between Ethan and the group, not barking yet, just watching, measuring distance, assessing threat, every movement precise. "Relax." One of the boys laughed. "We're just having fun." He threw an empty can that clattered near Ranger's paws. Ranger didn't move. He held his ground the way he'd been trained to, steady, unblinking, waiting for a command that never came. The blonde kid sneered. "What's he gonna do, stare us to death?" He kicked a spray of dirt towards the dog. "Come on, Mutt, let's see those teeth." "Leave him," Ethan said quietly. But quiet didn't work with people who mistook silence for weakness. The kid took a step closer, beer bottle dangling loosely from his hand. "You hiding behind your dog now, soldier boy?" Ranger's growl deepened, a low vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. The kid laughed, lifted the bottle, and swung. The crack was sharp. Glass shattered against Ranger's flank. The dog flinched but didn't retreat. His eyes locked on the attacker, body trembling, restraint, fighting instinct. "Enough!" Ethan barked, stepping forward. The kid shoved him back. Back off, old man. It happened fast. One of the other boys swung a stick, striking Ranger's ribs. Another kicked him hard, sending him tumbling into the dirt. The dog yelped, more in shock than pain. Ethan lunged, but two of them grabbed his arms. "Teach him some manners," the blonde one said, voice slick with alcohol and cruelty. He kicked Ranger again, hard, catching him under the jaw. Ranger staggered, fell, tried to stand. His hind leg buckled. The third kick sent him rolling down the shallow bank towards the creek. Ethan broke free, swinging a fist into one boy's face, sending him sprawling. The others backed away just far enough to laugh safely. The blonde kid raised both hands mockingly. "What's the matter? Can't fight without your dog?" Ethan's voice was low, deadly calm. "You have no idea what you just did." The kid smirked. "Oh, I think I do." Then he spat on the ground and signaled the others. They roared off on their ATVs, engines screaming as they tore back into the woods. For a long moment, the only sound was the river. Then Ethan heard it, a faint, broken whimper from below the ridge. He sprinted down the slope, slipping on the wet soil. Ranger lay half submerged in the shallow creek, water dark with blood. His chest rose and fell in ragged jerks. One ear twitched when he heard Ethan's voice. "Easy, buddy, easy," Ethan whispered, kneeling beside him. He pressed his hands to the dog's ribs, feeling for breaks, for breath. Ranger's eyes fluttered open, one brown, one cloudy with pain, and met his. The look wasn't fear, it was apology. "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "Don't you dare." He scooped the dog into his arms. The weight hit him harder than he expected, muscle gone limp, heavy with blood and water. He carried him up the bank, across the clearing, through the cabin door. Inside, he laid Ranger on the old wool blanket near the fire. The room smelled of iron and rain. Ethan tore open the first aid kit, hands shaking but precise. He cleaned the wounds, wrapping gauze around the gash along Ranger's shoulder. Each time the dog whimpered, Ethan's breath hitched like he'd taken the blow himself. When it was done, he sat back on his heels, face pale, jaw tight. The silence pressed in, thick and electric. He could feel the part of himself he'd buried. The soldier, the hunter, the man who didn't wait for justice but made it. It stirred, cold and awake. He looked down at Ranger. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady. His paw twitched weakly, as if reaching for something unseen. Ethan placed his hand over it. "You did your job. Now it's my turn." He stood, went to the cabinet, and pulled out a metal case he hadn't touched in years. Inside lay his service pistol, field knife, and a small black patch stitched with a trident and wings, the insignia of SEAL Team 9. He stared at it for a long time. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge. When the rain came, it came hard, drumming against the roof like gunfire. Ethan sat beside Ranger, eyes on the firelight flickering across the dog's coat. In that light, Ranger looked almost alive again, like the soldier he once was, not a broken animal left in the mud. Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "You rest, I'll handle this." Ranger's ear twitched. His eyes flickered open for a heartbeat, meeting Ethan's. Something unspoken passed between them, an old oath reborn. Then, through the rain, a sound cut the silence. ATVs again, distant but rising. Laughter, faint and cruel, echoing through the forest. Ethan's face hardened. He reached for the pistol and checked the chamber. The part of him that had died years ago came back to life, quiet and deliberate. The soldier was awake again, and this time, he wasn't the one being hunted. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the ridge soaked and silent. Mist rolled off the lake like breath from a wounded giant. Ethan carried Ranger to the truck wrapped in a blanket, the dog's fur still matted with blood and creek water. Every step hurt, not his body, but something deeper. Ranger whimpered once as Ethan set him down on the back seat. "Hang on, buddy," Ethan murmured, his voice low and frayed. "You're not done yet." The drive to Hollow Creek felt longer than it should have. The dirt road had turned to mud overnight, slick and narrow. Each bump made Ranger groan softly, and Ethan's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. He kept one hand stretched behind him, fingers brushing the dog's fur as if to remind them both they were still here. By the time he reached town, the sun was cutting through the clouds. The old veterinary clinic stood at the edge of Main Street, its wooden sign faded but sturdy. Morozova Animal Care. Ethan parked right at the door, lifted Ranger into his arms, and kicked the door open. A woman in a white coat turned sharply from the counter. She looked to be in her 40s, her dark hair tied back, eyes sharp and tired. "My God!" she whispered. "Put him here." Ethan laid Ranger on the metal table. The smell of antiseptic hit him hard. "He was attacked," he said. "Multiple blunt force hits, possible internal bleeding." She glanced up. "You've seen this before. Too many times." She peeled back the soaked bandages, assessing the wounds. Her movements were fast, precise, and calm in a way that made Ethan stop pacing. "You did good," she said quietly. "Field dressing's clean. Kept him from bleeding out." Ethan exhaled, only then realizing he'd been holding his breath since dawn. "Can you save him?" Her eyes flicked to his. "I'll do everything I can. What's his name?" "Ranger." At that, something flickered in her expression. Recognition. Almost pain. She reached out and gently traced the tag on his collar. "Ranger, SEAL K9. I remember that program. I worked with NATO in Kandahar. We treated dogs just like him. Some didn't make it. Some did. Depends how much fight's left inside." Ethan swallowed hard. He's still got plenty. "Then so do I," she said, and motioned for her assistant. "Let's prep for surgery." They moved quickly, inserting IVs, checking vitals. Ethan tried to stay out of the way, but his presence filled the room. His eyes followed every motion like a sniper tracking a target. Dr. Elena Morozova looked up at him once more. "You need to wait outside. He'll fight harder if he knows you're not panicking." He hesitated, then nodded. Before stepping out, he placed his hand on Ranger's paw. "You hear me? You've been through worse." Ranger's tail gave a weak twitch. That was enough. Outside, the waiting room was empty except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights. Ethan sat in the corner, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. He'd faced firefights, explosions, and betrayals, but nothing like this. The helplessness was unbearable. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then answered. "Ethan Cole," he said quietly. The voice on the other end rasped like gravel. "Didn't think I'd ever hear your voice again, Ghost." Ethan froze. "Rip?" "Yeah, Mason Hall, but nobody's called me that in years. Guess old habits die hard." Ethan leaned forward. "How the hell did you find me?" "Didn't have to. Someone's been asking questions about you. Deep ones. That's why I called." Ethan's chest tightened. "Who? You remember Yemen, Ghost, Operation Nomad?" The name alone pulled the air from the room. He hadn't heard it in years, but it still rang like a gunshot. "I remember." "You remember the convoy that never made it back? The ambush?" Rip's voice lowered. "The guy who sold us out, he didn't die over there. He came home. New name. New company." Ethan's heart started pounding. "Say it." "Lucas Grant. Real name's Leland Gray. Former defense contractor. He's the same bastard who handed our coordinates to insurgents in exchange for oil contracts. Now he's got some front company laundering money through real estate projects. Sierra Ridge, maybe?" Ethan closed his eyes, the pieces falling together in a pattern that made his skin crawl. The boys. The land grab. The sudden interest in his cabin. You're sure? Positive. I've been tracking him for months. He's dangerous, Cole. He's got feds in his pocket and mercs on payroll. And if he's come sniffing around you, it's not coincidence. He's cleaning up old ghosts. Ethan's voice was quiet but cold. He made a mistake coming for mine. Listen, Rip said, urgency rising. Don't move alone on this. I've got contacts, but it'll take time. You and that dog, stay off the grid. Don't trust the sheriff. Don't trust anyone connected to the county. Ethan's jaw tightened. One problem. What's that? They already heard him. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then Rip said softly, Then you know what has to come next. Before Ethan could respond, the door opened. Dr. Morozova stepped out, her gloves stained with blood, her face pale but steady. How is he? She met his eyes, voice calm but firm. He's alive, lost a lot of blood. We repaired a torn muscle and a puncture near his lung. If he makes it through the night, he's got a real chance. Ethan let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for years. Can I see him? She nodded. For a moment. He walked into the dim recovery room. Ranger lay beneath a blanket, hooked to an IV, chest rising and falling shallowly. His fur had been shaved where stitches crossed his flank. His face, though weak, still carried that same unbreakable focus, the look of a soldier who refused to surrender. Ethan knelt beside him. You did good, boy. Ranger's eyes fluttered open. He recognized the voice, the scent, the promise. His tail moved once, barely a flicker. Ethan stayed there, his hand resting on the dog's side, feeling the faint rhythm of breath against his palm. For the first time since the attack, he didn't feel rage. He felt purpose. Behind him, Dr. Morozova's voice was quiet. You've seen combat, haven't you? Ethan didn't look up. I've seen too much of everything. She hesitated. Then you know what comes next. Healing or war. Ethan turned to her. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. Sometimes they're the same thing. He stepped outside into the fading light, phone still in hand. The rain had started again, soft and cold. He stared out at the road leading north, the mountains looming in shadow. Somewhere up there, Grant was building his empire, on blood, on lies, on graves that weren't buried deep enough. Ethan looked back at the clinic, where Ranger was still fighting for his life. He slipped the phone into his pocket, jaw tightening. This isn't just about me anymore, he said under his breath. He came for the wrong dog. The wind rose through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and rain. For a fleeting moment, Ethan could almost hear Ranger's old bark echoing from the ridge, a sound that had once meant home. Now it meant war. A week passed before Ranger could stand again. His bandages had to be changed twice a day, his painkillers given on schedule. Dr. Morozova stopped by the cabin every other morning, never staying long, never asking too much. She understood the kind of silence that didn't want breaking. Ethan spent the days between storms patching the roof and repairing the fence. Anything to keep his hands busy, anything to keep from thinking about the rage that burned just beneath the calm. Ranger followed him slowly around the property, his limp pronounced, but his will unshaken. He would stop now and then, nose lifting toward the woods as if waiting for the threat to come back. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Ethan sat on the porch cleaning his sidearm. The last light caught on Ranger's collar tag, the one that read, Seal K9 427. He stared at it, then at the horizon beyond. Somewhere out there, men were laughing about what they'd done. Somewhere out there, Lucas Grant was building his empire over the bodies of better men. Ranger's low growl broke the quiet. He wasn't looking at the forest this time, but at the cabin itself, the hearth inside. What is it? Ethan asked, standing. The dog's gaze didn't waver. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of smoke and pine resin. Ethan crouched near the old brick fireplace. He had built the hearth himself when he first moved in, using stones he'd found near the lake. Ranger had always avoided it, sleeping by the door instead. Now, Ethan saw why. The stones near the base were slightly off-color. The mortar around them had fine cracks, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. He grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and began prying at the edge. Dust and ash spilled out, followed by the hollow echo of metal on metal. Underneath, hidden beneath a false stone plate, was a steel compartment sealed with a lock. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You never forget, do you, boy?" He fetched a key from the shelf, one he hadn't used in 5 years, and turned it in the lock. The hinges groaned as the panel lifted. Inside lay a waterproof case, military issue, its surface scratched and battered but intact. He carried it to the table and opened it carefully. Inside were files, hard drives, encrypted disks, all stamped with NATO and Defense Department insignias, long since declassified or destroyed. These were copies he'd made before the government buried the truth. Operation Nomad, Yemen, Leland Gray, and now Lucas Grant. Ethan inserted one of the drives into his laptop, the old screen flickering to life. Code scrolled down, followed by images, schematics of weapons shipments, satellite maps of smuggling routes, documents linking Grant Industries to offshore shell companies and private security firms with blood on their hands. He scrolled further, heart pounding. The signature on one of the contracts was burned into his memory. Leland Gray, Defense Consultant, U.S. Strategic Division. The same name Rip had spoken, the same man who had sold out their unit for profit. Ethan leaned back, eyes hard. The room felt smaller now, the air electric. He reached for his secure radio case, an old military communicator, black and scarred, still capable of encryption that most modern systems couldn't trace. He flipped the switches, typed in the old code from memory. A hiss, a click, then a familiar voice. "Cole, that you?" "Rip. Been waiting on your signal. You find something?" "Found everything," Ethan said. "Grant's not just involved, he's running it. The resort, the land deals, they're laundering money through defense contracts and smuggling arms under civilian shipments. Same signatures, same network that hit us in Yemen." Rip cursed under his breath. "Then it's worse than I thought. The attack on Ranger wasn't random. They're watching you, Cole. They probably know you kept the files." "That's what I'm counting on." A pause. "You planning to move?" Ethan's tone was quiet, steady. "Not yet. If they're watching, I'll let them think I'm broken. Then I'll decide who bleeds first." Rip hesitated. "You can't fight this alone." "I'm not alone." Ethan looked toward Ranger, lying near the doorway, eyes half closed but alert. He's already chosen his side. Ranger's tail thumped once, deliberate, as if in reply. Rip exhaled through static. "All right, Ghost, but listen, there's one more thing. I traced one of Grant's shell companies. It's registered under a name you'll remember. Thornton." Ethan froze. "Director Thornton, the man who briefed Nomad." "Same one. He didn't just let Gray live, he's his partner. The entire cover-up runs back to him. This isn't just revenge anymore, it's exposure." Ethan stood, jaw tight. "Then it's time to open the curtain." "Be smart about this," Rip warned. "You expose them, they'll come hard. Federal level, no witnesses." Ethan shut the laptop. "If they wanted a ghost," he said, voice low and final, "they're about to meet one." He disconnected the radio and slipped the drives back into the steel case. Then he walked to the hearth and rebuilt the false stone, sealing it once more. The files were safe for now. Outside, the sky had gone black. Lightning flashed across the ridge, illuminating the tree line in white fire. Ranger stood beside him, ears pricked, body rigid. The dog didn't flinch at the thunder. He only watched the woods, muscles trembling with a tension Ethan understood too well. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "I feel it too." He turned off the cabin lights, letting darkness claim the room. From the shelf above the door, he took down his old SEAL combat pack, still sealed in plastic, and began loading it. Ammunition, medical kit, binoculars, maps, radio. Each piece slid into place like it had never left his hands. By the time the rain started, the cabin was dark except for the glow of the fire. Ranger settled near the door, head resting on his paws but eyes open, watching every shadow move. Ethan sat beside him, one hand resting lightly on the dog's back. Outside, the thunder rolled closer. He wasn't running anymore. The hunter in him, the one he'd buried with the ghosts of his team, was awake again. And this time, he wasn't bound by orders or politics. He was coming for the men who hurt his brother. He was coming for the truth. The forest was silent, soaked in moonlight and mist. The pines loomed like sentinels, their needles whispering with every faint gust of wind. Ethan moved through them like he was part of the dark itself, silent, patient, alert. Ranger followed close behind, his steps almost soundless, his breath steady despite the healing wound on his flank. At the center of the old logging road, Ethan stopped. The spot was chosen for its isolation. 10 miles from town, no cameras, no lights, only the smell of damp earth and pine sap. Ranger sat beside him, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. He didn't bark, didn't move. He was waiting. Same as his handler. Headlights flickered through the trees, cutting across the mist. A single vehicle. Sheriff Dana Brooks had come alone. As instructed. The cruiser rolled to a stop 20 yards away. Dana stepped out, one hand resting on her holster, her flashlight sweeping the clearing. "You picked a hell of a place for a meeting, Cole." Ethan emerged from the shadows, the envelope already in his hand. "Safer than your office." Dana's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer. "You realize this is illegal as hell. I'm not supposed to meet armed ex-military in the middle of the forest." Ethan didn't flinch. "Then you can arrest me after you read what's in here." He tossed the envelope onto the hood of her cruiser. It slid against the wet metal, the edge stained with dirt. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were satellite photos, financial ledgers, and high-resolution images of armed men unloading crates at a warehouse bearing the logo of Grant Industries. "What am I looking at?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "Your town's future," Ethan said quietly. "Or its end." Dana studied the photos under her flashlight. Her lips tightened. "Those trucks, they're military transport." "Converted," Ethan replied. "Hidden under civilian contracts. Grant's not building a resort, he's building a supply line, off the grid, smuggling weapons through this valley." She turned to the next page and froze. It was a scan of a signed authorization form, stamped with a federal seal. The name at the bottom stopped her cold. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "This signature! Director Alan Thorne?" Ethan's voice was low, flat. "My former commanding officer." She looked up sharply. "You're saying this man, one of the most decorated federal officials in the country, is backing Grant's operation?" "I'm saying he was the one who sold out my team in Yemen, and now he's cleaning house." The forest seemed to grow smaller, the silence heavier. Dana's flashlight trembled slightly in her grip. "You're sitting on evidence that could take down half of Washington." Ethan's eyes were steady. "That's why I need someone who still believes the badge means something." Dana's jaw clenched. She looked at the photos again, her breath fogging in the cold. "If this is real, and God help me, I think it is, you've just made me a target too." "I didn't make you anything," Ethan said. "Grant did, the moment he took your town hostage." She folded the papers, slipped them back into the envelope, and pressed it to her chest like a secret too heavy to hold. "What do you need from me?" "Time," Ethan said. "If I'm right, they'll strike soon. They'll want to erase everything. Me, you, the files. I need you to keep them distracted. File a false tip. Pretend you're investigating me for trespassing or possession. Whatever makes sense. It'll give me a few hours." Dana frowned. "And what will you do with those hours?" Ethan's answer was quiet, almost calm. "I'll finish what they started." She studied him for a long moment, the line between duty and trust blurring. Finally, she nodded. "You know what this means, Cole. If I help you, there's no going back. They'll come after both of us." Ethan looked down at Ranger. The dog's head was raised, ears forward, eyes unblinking. "We're used to that." Dana exhaled, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "There's something you should see." She handed it to him. "State surveillance logs. One of my deputies flagged unusual activity near Grant's construction sites, unmarked vehicles, night shipments. But what matters is this." She pointed to the timestamp. "The same night your dog was attacked." Ethan felt his stomach twist. So it wasn't just kids on a joy ride. "No," Dana said. "It was staged. They wanted you to react. They wanted to see if you still had fight in you. Now they know." "Now they do," she replied grimly. They stood there in silence for a moment. Somewhere far off, an owl called through the mist. Dana finally broke the stillness. "I'll play my part, but if you're wrong about any of this—" "I'm not," Ethan said. She gave a faint, humorless smile. "That's what scares me." Dana turned back toward her cruiser, clutching the envelope tight. Ranger shifted beside Ethan, tail flicking once. The sheriff stopped halfway to her door, glancing back. "Cole, for what it's worth, I think your dog's tougher than most men I've met." Ethan's mouth twitched, something that might have been a smile in another life. "He's earned it." She nodded once and got into her vehicle. The headlights swung across the trees, catching Ethan and Ranger in their beam for a brief, ghostly second before she drove off into the night. Ethan watched until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then he crouched, running his hand down Ranger's neck. "We've got one ally, boy. That's one more than last time." Ranger leaned into the touch, eyes locked on the road where the cruiser had gone. A low, uneasy growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. Ranger didn't answer. He didn't need to. Moments later, Ethan saw it too. A pair of headlights, distant and dim, following the same path Dana had taken down the ridge. Not a police car. A black SUV. His blood ran cold. "They're watching her." He reached for the radio, voice clipped and urgent. "Rip, it's Cole. They made her. They're onto us." Static. Then Rip's tense reply. "Get ready, brother. If they know about her, they know about you." Ethan looked out into the black forest where the SUV's lights had vanished. Somewhere ahead, Dana Brooks was driving straight into a trap. He turned to Ranger, who was already on his feet, limping but ready. The dog's gaze was fixed, his posture unyielding. Ethan nodded once. "Looks like we're not done yet." The forest swallowed the last trace of moonlight as thunder rolled over the ridge. The alliance had been forged, but now the enemy knew exactly who had turned against them. The storm rolled in without mercy. Sheets of rain pounded the mountainside, swallowing the forest in darkness. Lightning cracked above the ridge, painting the cabin in flashes of blue and white. Every sound was sharper, every shadow alive. Ethan stood by the window, the weight of the rifle familiar in his hands. He'd fought in deserts, jungles, and ruins. But this was different. This was home. Across the room, Rip checked the last of the perimeter charges. "You sure the lines are still good?" he asked. "Triple-checked." Ethan said, eyes scanning the tree line. They won't get closer than 20 yards without lighting up the sky. Rip gave a short nod. Old-school SEAL work, just like Nomad. Let's hope the outcome's better this time. Outside, thunder rolled over the valley. Ranger lay near the doorway, his bandaged flank rising and falling. He shouldn't have been out of bed, but there was no keeping him down. His ears twitched with every distant movement. He knew the storm wasn't the real threat. Ethan crouched beside him, running a hand down his head. You stay inside, understand? You've done enough. Ranger's amber eyes lifted, stubborn and knowing. His tail thumped once against the floor. From the window, Rip called out quietly. Movement. 3 o'clock, near the tree line. Ethan moved beside him, raising the night vision scope. Through the green haze, dark shapes advanced slowly between the pines, 5, maybe 6 men in tactical gear, spreading wide like wolves. Their formation was professional, no amateurs. They've got night optics. Rip muttered, probably thermal. They'll spot us fast. Then we make them see what we want. Ethan said. He flicked a switch near the window frame. Outside, a line of makeshift floodlights hidden under camo tarps burst to life, cutting through the rain. For a split second, the mercenaries froze, blinded. Now, Ethan said. Rip hit the detonator. Small bursts erupted across the perimeter. Flash charges, bright and deafening but harmless. Through the chaos, shadows stumbled, shouting orders into radios. Ethan fired once. A clean shot dropped the first man where he stood. Another moved to flank left, and Ethan's second round caught him mid-step. The forest lit up with return fire, bullets tearing through branches and wood. Inside the cabin, splinters flew from the walls. Rip ducked behind the counter, reloading. They're trying to circle. Ethan moved to the back window, firing short, controlled bursts. They think we're cornered. A low growl cut through the noise. Ranger, struggling to his feet, limped toward the front door. Stay, Ethan barked. But the dog ignored him. Outside, another flash of lightning illuminated the ridge, and for a moment, Ethan saw it. A second group, moving from the slope above, trying to close in from higher ground. He cursed. Rip, we've got a second team. They're pushing from the west. Rip swore under his breath, grabbing the shotgun. I'll cover the back. You take the roof. Ethan sprinted for the ladder, pulling himself up through the trapdoor into the attic. The wind howled through the gaps in the boards. From the roof, he could see everything. The ridge, the dark forest below, and the faint muzzle flashes moving like fireflies through the rain. He adjusted the scope and fired, each round cutting through the storm. The air reeked of gunpowder and wet pine. He could hear Rip shouting below, the steady rhythm of return fire holding the line. Then, another sound, a deep, guttural snarl. Ethan turned just in time to see Ranger push open the cabin door with his shoulder. The wounded dog dragged himself into the rain, blood mixing with the mud under his paws. Ranger! Ethan shouted, but it was too late. The shepherd's instincts had taken over. He moved low and fast, disappearing into the underbrush. Seconds later, a muffled scream echoed through the storm. One of the mercenaries had stepped too close to the porch. Ranger lunged from the shadows, teeth flashing, knocking the man off balance. The enemy fired wildly, missing every shot before Ethan's bullet ended the fight. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the forest erupted again with gunfire. Ranger, inside! Ethan yelled. The dog staggered back toward the porch, soaked and trembling, but alive. His growl, half fury, half defiance, rose through the storm. And that growl saved them. The mercenaries, hearing it, turned their focus toward the sound. 2 of them broke cover, moving for the porch, their silhouettes outlined against the lightning. Ethan caught both in his scope and fired twice. 2 flashes. 2 bodies down. Rip's voice came through the static on the radio. They're retreating east. Not yet, Ethan said. He scanned the ridge. Something was off. Too organized, too fast. Then he saw it. Farther up the slope, headlights flared through the rain, an armored truck positioned for overwatch. A sniper team. Before he could react, a single shot cracked through the storm. The round hit the chimney above him, sending brick shards raining across the roof. "Sniper!" he shouted. "High Ridge, west side!" But before he could return fire, a second rifle barked from the opposite hill, a lower, heavier report. The sniper's muzzle flash winked out. A familiar voice crackled through Ethan's earpiece. "Told you I still had good aim." Ethan exhaled a tight breath of relief. "Joe Patterson, you old bastard." From the ridge, the retired marksman chambered another round in his weathered M24, the same rifle he'd used 40 years ago. "You boys hold the line. I'll keep the sky clear." Another shot echoed, and a mercenary dropped mid-run. The enemy's advance faltered. Between Ethan's precision fire, Rip's shotgun blasts, and Joe's overwatch, the siege began to crumble. The rain turned from a roar to a whisper. Bodies lay scattered among the trees, motionless. The surviving mercenaries fell back into the darkness, dragging their wounded with them. Ethan climbed down from the roof, soaked to the bone, adrenaline still hammering in his chest. Rip was already checking the windows. "You think that's all of them?" Ethan shook his head. "No, this was just the first wave." Ranger limped to his side, panting heavily, eyes still sharp despite the pain. Ethan knelt, resting a hand on his fur. "You did good, buddy, real good." The dog pressed his head against Ethan's arm, exhausted but proud. Rip wiped the rain from his face and looked out into the dark. "Grant's not going to stop. Not after this." Ethan nodded slowly, eyes cold. "Then neither will we." Outside, the storm moved east, leaving behind a field of smoke, blood, and silence. On the ridge above, Joe Patterson lowered his rifle and watched the cabin lights flicker. "Hell of a fight," he muttered, "but the war's just waking up." Lightning flashed once more over Sierra Ridge, brief, brilliant, and gone. But in that light, 3 silhouettes stood firm: a soldier, an old man, and a battered shepherd united against the storm that refused to die. By dawn, the storm had passed. What remained was smoke, rain, and silence. The cabin stood scarred, but still standing, the smell of burnt pine heavy in the air. Ethan sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the mist curl off the ridge. Every muscle in his body ached, but his mind was sharp, waiting for what came next. Ranger lay beside him, head on his paws. His right eye was swollen shut, a dark line of dried blood cutting across his muzzle. Every few minutes, his ear twitched towards the tree line, alert, even now. "You did good, boy," Ethan murmured. "Better than I ever could." The faint crunch of tires on gravel pulled his attention to the road. Moments later, flashing lights appeared through the fog. Sheriff Dana Brooks led the convoy, her cruiser splattered with mud. Behind her, 2 federal SUVs rolled up, soldiers stepping out with rifles raised. Rip appeared at the doorway, weapons slung low. "Guess they're finally showing up for cleanup duty." "Not just cleanup," Ethan said, rising to his feet. He handed Rip a small drive. "Make sure this gets where it needs to go if I don't come back." Rip frowned. "What are you planning, Ghost?" Ethan's answer was quiet. "Finishing it." Dana approached cautiously, eyes scanning the perimeter littered with the aftermath of battle. Shell casings, footprints, torn camo fabric fluttering in the wet wind. "Jesus, Cole, what the hell happened here?" "Justice," Ethan said simply, "or something close to it." She followed his gaze to the pickup truck parked by the old shed. 2 mercenaries knelt beside it, hands zip-tied, soaked and shivering. Between them, bleeding and bruised but alive, was Lucas Grant. His tailored jacket was torn, mud streaking his face, eyes darting in disbelief at the ruin around him. Dana motioned to her deputies. "Get him in the car. Full custody. No calls, no press." Grant snarled, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what you're doing. You touch me, you'll bring the whole system down on you." Dana leaned in close. "Then I guess the system's overdue for a shake-up." As they dragged him toward the cruiser, Grant caught Ethan's eye. "You think this ends with me? You're a ghost, Cole. Ghosts don't win, they just haunt." Ethan stared back, unmoving. "Then I'll haunt every man who built your empire." Dana turned back to him. "You've got proof?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a second drive, identical to the one he'd given Rip. "Everything. Financial records, satellite data, comm logs, Grant Industries, the federal accounts, Thorne's black operations, all of it." She hesitated. "That's a death wish handing me this." Ethan's voice stayed level. "It's insurance. The moment I sent you that message last night, a backup triggered, a dead man protocol. Copies of everything are already en route to the Pentagon and the Department of Defense. They can't bury it now." Dana's expression shifted from disbelief to grim respect. "You just set off a political bomb." "Good," he said. "It's about time someone heard the blast." Rip whistled low from the porch. "You sure you want to poke the bear like that?" Ethan glanced at him. "The bear's already in the house." For the next hour, the clearing filled with movement, deputies securing evidence, medics treating the wounded, and federal agents quietly making calls that would ripple all the way to Washington. When it was done, Dana approached again. "They'll want statements, probably arrest orders too." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Then I'll save them the paperwork." He looked toward the tree line, where the light was breaking through the fog. "I'm not interested in being their story." She studied him, searching for something in his expression. "You're not running again, are you?" He shook his head. "No, just done fighting ghosts." Her voice softened. "For what it's worth, Cole, you did the right thing." Ethan's gaze drifted to Ranger, now resting quietly by the steps, his one good eye watching every move. "No," he said. He did. Dana followed his eyes and smiled faintly. "He's one hell of a soldier. He's family," Ethan said. The medics approached to examine Ranger. The shepherd tried to rise, stubborn as always, but Ethan placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Easy. You've done enough." Rip crouched beside them. "He's a fighter. Reminds me of his handler." Ethan didn't answer. His mind was somewhere else, back in Yemen, back in the sand and the fire, hearing the same heartbeat he heard now, steady and loyal beside him. Hours later, as the sun broke through the clouds, news began to ripple across the radios. The name Grant Industries was spreading through federal channels, indictments, seizures, arrests. One by one, the men responsible for the betrayal of SEAL Team Nomad were being dragged into the light. Rip came out from the cabin, holding a mug of black coffee. "You hear it? They've already frozen Thorne's accounts. He's finished." Ethan nodded slowly, staring at the rising light. "It won't bring them back, but maybe it'll stop the next one." Ranger stirred, his head resting against Ethan's boot. The breeze carried the scent of wet cedar, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something close to peace. Dana approached one last time before leaving. "Command's going to want a statement from you. Medal recommendations, commendations, all that nonsense." Ethan looked down at Ranger. He did the real fighting. Give it to him. Dana's smile was tired but warm. "I'll see what I can do." When the convoy finally rolled out, the valley fell quiet again. Ethan sat back on the porch beside Ranger, watching the sun rise over Sierra Ridge. The forest was still, The war finally over. Rip joined them, leaning against the railing. You ever think about what comes next? Ethan shrugged. Something. Quieter, maybe. Somewhere no one's shooting at us. Ranger's tail moved once against the floorboards. Rip chuckled. Guess he's in. Ethan looked out at the horizon, the storm clouds breaking apart in slow motion. Yeah, he said softly. He always is. And as the first light washed over the cabin, the ghosts of the past began to fade, leaving behind only a man, a loyal dog, and the faint echo of a promise kept. A year had passed since the siege at Sierra Ridge. The valley, once scarred by gunfire and fear, now stood in quiet rebirth. The cabin had been rebuilt, the forest had healed, and the story of that night had become something more than rumor. It had become legend. That morning, under a wide Colorado sky, the townspeople gathered at Sierra Ridge Memorial Park. The scent of pine and new grass filled the air. A brass band played softly as the mayor unveiled the monument, a bronze sculpture of a man and a German shepherd, both facing the mountains as if still watching for danger. The plaque read, "Ranger and the Rescuers, for those who fought so others could sleep in peace." Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his jacket pockets. He didn't like ceremonies, never had. But today was different. Today was for him, and not for him. Ranger sat beside him, his coat flecked with silver now, the once scarred flank hidden beneath thick fur. His one good eye still held that fierce light, as if the old instincts hadn't faded at all. Sheriff Dana Brooks stepped up to the podium. The wind caught her hair as she adjusted the microphone. 1 year ago, she began, her voice carrying over the crowd. This valley almost fell to greed and silence. What saved it wasn't power or politics, it was loyalty. The kind that doesn't ask for medals or headlines. The kind that simply stands its ground. She paused, looking toward Ethan. Their eyes met across the crowd. Ranger didn't just guard his home. She continued. He guarded a promise that truth still matters, even when it costs everything. The crowd grew still. Children stopped fidgeting. Even the wind seemed to pause between the pine branches. A small boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing towards the statue. Is that the dog from the story? Dana smiled gently. Yes, she said. That's him. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. Applause rippled through the park, soft but steady, like rain on an old roof. Ethan felt the weight in his chest ease just a little. For a moment, he saw not the blood or the gunfire, but the quiet strength that had always been beside him, the sound of paws on dirt, the steady breath in the dark, the loyalty that never faltered. After the ceremony, people came up to shake his hand, to thank him, to take pictures. He nodded politely, said little, and slipped away toward the edge of the field. Ranger followed, tail swaying lazily, still alert, still scanning. They stopped, near the old stone wall overlooking the valley. Below, the river glimmered in the sun. Rip was there too, leaning against his truck, grinning. Didn't think you'd actually show up, Ghost. Ethan smirked. You think I'd miss my own partner's statue? Rip chuckled. You mean our statue? Ethan shook his head. No, he earned it. We just tried to keep up. Rip knelt beside Ranger, scratching behind his ear. You're still the toughest son of a gun in the state, huh? Ranger tilted his head, huffing softly as if agreeing. From the crowd behind them, Dana approached, her uniform replaced with plain clothes now. She carried a folded envelope. The Department of Defense finally finished their review, she said. The files you sent, they changed things. They shut down 3 shell corporations, opened new investigations. Thorne's going to spend the rest of his life answering questions. Ethan took the envelope, but didn't open it. I don't need proof. I know, Dana said, but others do. You gave them that. For a long moment, they stood together in silence, watching the clouds drift over the ridgeline. The land was peaceful now. Dana finally turned to leave. You'll stick around. Ethan looked toward the cabin far in the distance. Yeah, he said quietly. I think we've done enough running. When she was gone, Ethan sat down on the grass, the sunlight warm on his shoulders. Ranger lay beside him, resting his head on Ethan's boot. The breeze carried the distant sound of laughter from the park. You hear that? Ethan said softly. Peace. You made that happen. Ranger blinked, his ear twitching at the sound of a distant hawk. He didn't understand the words, but he didn't have to. His tail brushed the ground twice, slow and steady. Ethan's gaze lingered on the statue in the distance, the bronze reflection of their bond, forever facing the mountains they once defended. For the first time in years, he let himself breathe without looking over his shoulder. As the sun dipped lower, a group of students approached the monument. A girl placed a single white flower at its base. The boy beside her read the inscription out loud, his voice small but proud. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. The scene faded with the last rays of light glinting off Ranger's bronze eyes. And somewhere above the valley, where the air turned cold and clear, a shepherd's bark echoed faintly against the mountains, steady, watchful, eternal. Ethan smiled to himself. Still guarding, huh? Ranger's tail thumped once, as if in answer. The camera pulled back, showing the snow-dusted peaks, the rebuilt cabin, and the bronze statue shining under the setting sun. Across the screen, the words appeared. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. Then, after a beat, what's your story with a loyal pet? The music swelled, strings and soft percussion, carrying the emotion of all that had been lost and found. And as the final image lingered on the statue of Ranger, standing guard forever against the wind, the narrator's voice closed softly, like a promise. Support the channel for more stories of loyalty, courage, and the bond that never breaks. German Shepherd.